Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the last session of the moveIT series, and this night we're gonna listen to Forget Quality. Also a renowned presentation which has been presented already on Eurostar, won the Best Runner-Up Presentation Award, SQA Days, Best Presentation Award, the Danish Testing Days, where for the first time in their history they had a perfect score for this presentation. And Michael also went to Armenia and Peru and Madrid with this smashing presentation. Sometimes Forget Quality, sometimes a more provoking title being used. You're here with 165 people subscribed, so I hope you're ready to enjoy your ride. Michael is our learning and development manager here at CTG. Already for 15 years specializing in testing, and lately not only testing but everything which goes with agility, because also in the big world, Michael is for ISTQB the worldwide chapter lead of the Agile chapter. So I welcome Michael on stage with one last thing I need to say to you all, being if you have questions, don't forget to put them in the chat whilst the mouse is moving and taking a walk with me on the presentation. So Michael, welcome on stage. If you have questions, ladies and gentlemen, put them in the chat. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Peter, for the introduction. Peter was talking in his presentation about a provoking title. Unfortunately, I cannot pronounce the initial title, but at least the main word in the title is quality. And it's been 16 years now in IT business, and over these 16 years, if one word pops up all of the time, it is quality. Now, what is quality? What defines quality? That's, for us as testers, a very important question, because we strive for quality, we live for quality, we want to die for quality, we have some floated feelings about quality, but quality is, for us, for most of us, the center of our universe. And I wanted to see what quality was for other people. I have my idea, but that might not be your idea. You might have a different idea. So I did some research. I took a closer look at how quality is perceived in the IT, and then more specifically in testing. What do testers feel that would be a good consolidation of quality? What I did is I take a look at a number of test plans, test strategies, test visions, reports, all the definitions and all the documentation you can find. And when it came to quality, I found a number of parameters. One of the parameters I found was that quality was expressed in the percentage of all the requirements covered. Meaning, for a project, for a product, for a service, there were a number of requirements stated, and we have tested a number of those. So for some processes, this was a good explanation of quality. For other ones, I saw a certain percentage of the code covered. For all the lines of code, a certain percentage was covered by test cases, passed or not passed, and that was for them a good idea about quality. For others, it was the percentage of test cases executed. We have written 100 test cases, 90 of them are executed, so we have 90% test case execution rate. That's another idea about quality. We have the same thing, but then test cases passed. Has nothing to do with how many do you have executed, but how many did you have passed. I saw things like open defects. So even for a tester whose main goal is to trying to guarantee some level of quality, the definition of quality might differ. What you immediately see is that the reality is far more complex than the model that we're making in our head about quality. It's also a matter of an investment decision. The total quality contains too many parameters, so you want to minimize the number of parameters you have. Hence, that there's always a factor of risk when you talk about quality. Now, what did I find? Not only these parameters to express and to trying to measure quality, but I also saw the percentages that people were trying to achieve. And you can only come to one conclusion if you take a look at these reports. That's the fish that's trying to jump out of the bowl and doesn't or can't reach that high. We want to have too much. Our own perception, our own expectation about quality is simply unreachable. We want too much. I see reports that we want 100% requirement coverage and 90% code coverage and no open defects. that is simply unattainable for most processes, for most projects, and for most products. That's not possible. Let me share some thoughts about quality. If you're a student in the US, you have to follow some SAT test where they try to measure your degree of proficiency in English, which is a good idea. And most of us think, in Belgium, in Holland, in Europe, that we are very profound in English, that we understand and speak and write English very well. Well, that's a bit of an inflated idea. If you take a look at the scores we maintain in English, they are not that high. At max, you're at a 6 out of 10, a 7 out of 10, but more is very unlikely on the same SAT test given to a 16, 17, 18-year-old in Belgium. So our own understanding about quality is a bit wrong. Even more, we overestimate our own level of quality, which is of course dangerous. If we tend to overestimate our level of quality, while still asking too much level of quality over the ones that deliver to us, we have inflated demands. That's not only true for testers, that's also true for other participants in the IT atmosphere. Take a look at this guy. You might know him. Seems like he had a Corona haircut. This is Professor Les Hatton from the University of Kent. You might have read some of his books. I think his most famous one is Safer C, about the vulnerabilities in the C language. But what Les Hatton has dedicated his life to is software quality and software safety. One of the statistics he has gathered over the years is what he calls the defect percentage. The defect percentage is the amount of defects you tend to find per kilo lines of code, per 1,000 lines of code, independent of the language or the software or the type of industry. Now, what is shown in the studies done by Les Hatton is that the defect percentage over the last 15 years has remained unchanged. There's no difference at all. There's no improvement. There's no downfall. It has remained the same. So even with all the knowledge we have gathered, even with all these automated systems, with code reviewing, with automatic filling of code, with Stack Exchange and Code Exchange and whatever kind of platforms you have to let people review your code, as developers, as code writers, as authors, we still make as many defects as before, despite all the measures we have taken. So there's no improvement there. There's no survival of the fittest in there. It's just the same amount of defects. We cannot do anything about it. So if we ask people to have less defects in code or better code coverage, maybe we're asking too much. Suppose you're graduating or you're going to university or to a higher degree. The levels you need to obtain, they are quite clear. If you score 50% or something higher, you pass. If you score 65% or higher, you pass with honor or cum laude. 75% with great honor, 85 and higher with the highest honor. These are the regular degrees when you go to university. Now, statistics from universities show something else. What do you see? That more than half of people that takes exams, we're not talking about the dropouts, but more than 50% of all people taking exam does not pass the exam. 32.6% passes, 10% with honor, almost 6% with great honor, and minus 1% with the highest honor. That means that less than 1% of those people taking exam score 85%. Then why is it that when we talk about code quality or even requirements quality, we demand scores like 90, 95 and 100%? These are the same people that had to take exams, that had to pass some tests, and we're asking different quality criteria. What's even worse, and maybe that's a bit too much, but if you want to become a medical doctor, a physician, 60% is enough. So if you score 6 out of 10 correct, you can practice medicine. So why are we asking more of our analysts, of our developers, and even of our testers? Conclusion for me is that maybe perfection cannot be within your reach. You can strive for perfection, you must aim for perfection, but you not demand or ask perfection. Sometimes it's okay when your product goes into production with known defects. Sometimes it's okay that your product goes live while not everything has been tested. That's the world nowadays. Sometimes it's better to become first to the market than second with a better product. The first often wins. Now, whether you go live or not becomes most a business decision. And a great example of these business decisions is a car I love a lot. That's the Ford Pinto. the 1971 model. The Ford Pinto was the answer of the American car industry to those nice ecological cars coming from the East in the 70s. We had the fuel crises and Ford wanted to have a car that was much more eco-friendly, that consumed less gas and gasoline. So the designers started, they did their design, they did some testing, and a few weeks before they had to go into production, the model was already ordered by a number of customers, they found something out during crash testing. It appeared that if you drove a Ford Pinto and you had a rear-end collision, so somebody drove in the back of your car, there was a certain percentage chance that your car would erupt in flames. And what did engineers do? And what did the business do? They made a risk assessment. They assessed that the chance of having such an accident was X%. They've estimated that if that happened, that meant so many lawsuits, and that meant a certain number, a certain money that it represented. On the other hand, if they had to redesign the full end train, the back end train of the car, that had a certain engineering cost. So they came to the conclusion, you know what? The cost of re-engineering is higher than the lawsuits, so we just bring the Ford Pinto to the market. And we keep silent about these mistakes or these possible flaws. Now, unfortunately for Ford, and especially for the consumers of the Ford car, in the first 3 months, more than 40 people died in rear-end collisions where the car erupted in flames. So it was a very bad business decision. Not every product can be put into numbers. And if you do it, you have to take into account that every way you try to measure the risk, the complexity, and all the other parameters, it's an abstraction of reality. It can always contain mistakes. That's the problem with all these quality models. It remains an assessment at a point in time. You can never predict the future. Conclusion for that is that your quality, or the perceived level of quality, is always determined by the context in which you work. If you work for a financial institution, quality might be more important than when you're redesigning a small web shop for your aunt who is knitting some stuff now in the corona crisis. The context defines the level of quality. So you have to be aware of the context where you're working. Which is fine. But as testers, that means nothing to you. We just said that, well, quality is contextual and it's determined by the environment, and you have maybe some inflated ideas about quality. But how can we, as testers, determine the quality then? What customers want? Well, let me introduce to you the cone of quality. Even though it's winter, I have a nice cone for you. Not filled, but at least it's a cone. And this cone has been identified with 3 different parameters. The first one is time, the second one is budget, and the third one is a scope, or even better, the inverse of the scope. And these 3 parameters have an influence to each other. What is the influence? Well, if you give the same project more time, there's a possibility that you will reach higher quality, given that the scope remains unchanged. If you give people a higher budget, meaning more people or more tools, while the time remains the same, there's also the possibility that you have a higher quality. However, if you decide to increase the scope, changing requirements or adding requirements, while time and budget, number of people, and deadline remains unchanged, that might or should or can result in a possible lower quality. That's the effect of these 3 parameters, which is not rocket science. Most testers are very well aware of this. Unfortunately, most project managers or POs have some form of reality distortion field where they have no idea that there's an impact. Yeah, we have the time to add some quality criteria there, or we can remove some features over there. That's not true. The moment you start fiddling with these parameters, there will be a certain effect on quality. And when you talk to these project managers and POs, this is what you get. This is the quality they hope for, where you don't even have only functionality, but you also have portability and efficiency and security and user-friendliness and all these nice abilities. What you get is often much less. We would already be happy if we get 1 cone with 1 scoop of ice cream. That would be great if just functionality would work. Unfortunately, what I've seen over the past, that's not always the case. Now, quality is not only about the development of the software itself. The basis for quality is requirements, because your requirements are your building blocks of your application. If you can't elicit your requirements properly, if you elicitate your requirements incorrectly, if they are incomplete, incorrect, or inconsistent, there will be some penalization at the end. So everybody knows that investing in requirements is very important. Unfortunately, there are some constraints to requirements. Well, first of all, your requirements need to be smart. We all know the acronym SMART: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound, or any kind of variant you can come to that. We all know that. The trouble for most companies is that SMART means expensive. And expensive can be expressed in money, that's what you see over there, but also in time. The more you want to invest in requirements, the slower it seems that your project makes a start. So the longer it will take before the first development takes place. And that frightens a lot of project managers and product owners and product managers, because they seem that they are lacking some quick start. No, an investment in requirement always pays back, but you have to go through the first stages of the product development cycle. The strength over there is when you go for an agile approach and you go to user stories or even collaborative user story writing, where you validate stories from the beginning, then you can have that smart requirements from the beginning. But even then, you do not develop your user stories at the beginning for your full scope. That's too much. Whatever you decide, whatever your budget for requirements is, it's always finding an equilibrium, a balance of quality between what the business wants to pay for quality and what you have to invest in quality. The moment the equilibrium is gone, when you test too much, business says, wait, it's way too expensive. We want to go live right now. If you test too little, the business might be happy with the initial lower investment, but it might be that once you go into production, the maintenance cost goes through the roof. That's the equilibrium you need to find. For you as testers, that is the question, the million-dollar question you need an answer to. One, is testing enough? When will the business be happy? Now, we said that we want to determine the quality investment. How much do we want to do that? How can we do that? What are the tools in our toolbox that we can use to determine this level of investment? I think the first and far most known tool to invest the quality is risk-based testing, where you determine for every requirement what the risk is, project risk or product risk. You determine the risk level, and based upon that analysis or that assessment, you determine which features you want to test first, depending on the amount of time you have and the resources. And typically you get a nice graph like this, where everything at the right top corner is a very high impact and a very high likelihood. Impact from the business side, the financial loss we might suffer, the likelihood from the technical side, what is the chance that it will happen, and both parameters grasp into each other. So everything the top right has the highest priority, where the lower left bottom has the lowest priority. The more time, the more money, the more resources you have, the more you can cover from red to orange to yellow to green. Now, this model has been in use for 30, 40 years already. That's not rocket science, and most companies still live by this model. It's a great model. But there's one problem with that model. It's a risk-based model, and risk means being afraid. If you only want to avoid risks, you are never going in the direction of exploration, in innovation, in inventing something new. If a new startup, if a great company wants to introduce a new feature, they cannot think about risks. Risks should not be their first priority. It's the innovation which is the most important one. And covering, assessing, identifying, and managing the risks come afterwards, not in the first place. So as I said, your context defines your testing efforts. Depending on the type of product you work on and the company you work on, your risk level and the impact of it will differ and will define your context. So risk can be a way to determine your quality investment, but how can you better determine that quality investment? Let me give you a tip for that one. You see the nice graph over there, that's Professor Noriyuki Kano. He's the inventor of the infamous, maybe not so known Kano model. The Kano model is a way to elicit user requirements, to come up with all the user requirements that are often forgotten. Because from my experience, I've seen a lot of products and projects where when it came down to requirements, we had a full list, and then we go into production or even in testing, and we found out that there were far more requirements from my users that were unanswered, that were not developed. Or even worse, that there were requirements that were there, that were not asked by our users, where we had to spend some development effort and testing effort. Professor Kano tried to make sure that that wouldn't happen. And the example he always gave, I have this nice car over here, is what are your requirements for a car? If you can buy or rent a brand new car next week, what is the most important thing for you for the car? And what most people in this research answered is, well, it needs leather seats or a CD player or a GPS system or anything like that. Well, that's only one level of requirements. That is what you call the known requirements. But there are also a lot of unknown or subconscious requirements that you need to elicit. And there the model comes in handy. What you see in the model is that you have two axes, the X and the Y axis, in which you plot the degree of satisfaction and the requirement fulfillment. The first level of requirements are what you call the dissatisfiers or the must-be quality. These are the things that we know in the back of our heads we want it, but we have a problem in expressing those because they are so self-evident. When we talk about a car and people ask for your requirements that are the engine, the driving wheel, the brake pedal, the gas pedal, the wheels, a gas tank. These are the things that we fail to mention to an analyst, to a product owner, because for us, everybody knows that the product must have it. That's why they are dissatisfier. Even if they are fully fulfilled, people will not be happy because you just have the basic stuff. What most people are very good at in expressing is what you call your satisfiers, your one-dimensional quality attributes. These are all your options for your car. The leather seats, the automatic window wipers, the rain sensors, the automatic lights, all these options. The more you have of those, the happier people will be, but also the more they're willing to pay for your product. Unless if you lack some dissatisfiers, then they will not buy your product. Suppose you have what you call a car with leather seats, but without the driving wheel, then people will not buy that car of you. So these ones you're very conscious of. These are the ones you will always find in an analysis document or in user stories or in epics or visions. The last categories are your delighters. That is what attracts the quality. Your delighters are what makes people stand in line and wait for weeks to have that product. They're in a waiting list. These are the things that you were unknown that you would want those. This is the feature that you had no idea you desired it until you heard it, and then everybody wants it. Of course, this is a silver bullet of all design, not only software design, but every kind of design. Whether it's a new game or a new smartphone, the moment you have that new feature, everybody stands in line for it. Now, over time, every delighter drops into a satisfier and even to a dissatisfier. What a GPS was 10-15 years ago for a car has now become a satisfier or even dissatisfier. What a compass on a smartphone was 20 years ago is now a dissatisfier. Every cell phone now has a compass, but nobody uses it anymore. Until a certain point in time that the review magazine tells you, well, this smartphone doesn't have a compass anymore, and then everybody starts complaining. So over time, normally it drops down. Some things, from a vintage point of view, can raise again in time also. That's a possibility. So as a tester, when you get an analysis document or you get a product backlog or any kind of consolidation of requirements, ask yourself, are these requirements from one source, only the satisfiers most likely? And have we well elicited the delighters and the satisfiers also? If not, ask questions. That's the main task of a tester. Keep on asking questions. Now, this is the Kano model. That's great for testers, not only for testers. There's another way of doing that. There's also a way to make a better decision regarding quality. And I might already hear you say, yeah, but it's not up to us to make a decision as testers. We are just executing the test cases. We are asking all these Calimero questions and we are always complaining. That's true. But as a tester, you can assist in the decision-making process. And a great model to help you making this decision is created by Karl Wiegers. Even though it's not a recent photo, it still looks like a Corona photo. Karl Wiegers made a scheme, a step plan to determine a good prioritization for any features in a software product. What Wiegers did is, in his first step, he said you have to determine what are the requirements. And if there are requirements that are impossible not to implement, you should not prioritize those. These are the ones you absolutely must have. We're talking about legal requirements or the back end of the system. You cannot have a prioritization on those. I've taken here an example of an application or a website we are trying to revamp, and I've listed 5 features: the registration module, an update of the content, meaning the text on the website, a Facebook integration, customer migration, because we have updated the registration module, we have more fields now, so we need to migrate our existing customers, and a new look and feel, a new CSS, a new layout for the website. These are the 5 features, the 5 functions we need to prioritize. And we are set to determine what has the highest priority as testers, but not only as testers, also as analysts and as developers. There are a number of factors you need to take into account. One of those factors is the benefit. The benefit is what people are willing to pay for that feature. Typically, this is something you let the business, the product owner, or the proxy of those, you let them assess that. You see here in the example that Facebook integration and the new look and feel have the highest benefit. People want to pay money to have a new look and feel. The registration module, on the other hand, has a very relative low benefit. People are not willing to pay for a new registration module. They actually don't care. On the other hand, you have the penalty. The penalty is what people are willing to neglect your product if you do not have this feature. So if there are certain features that your product omits, people will leave your product and go to a different opportunity, a different product in the same range. You see here that an update of the content is the most important thing. If we don't update our content, people will leave. People want updated content. On the other hand, the registration module, customer migration are not that important. If we don't do this in the first place, people will not penalize us. The 4th step is to calculate the value. The value is the sum of the benefit and the penalty. So you see here, if you combine those two, typically, as said, benefit is for the business, penalization is also for the business. So this is the business look and feel. You see that the highest value for our customers, according to the business, is an update of the content. So if you ask the business what is now the highest priority, it's updating the content. And that is also expressed in the same thing, it's the value percentage, where you calculate the value divided by the total value. That is your value percentage. Good to make a prioritization for the business. But we're not only listening to the business. Business is one side of it. We also estimate the relative cost. We're not estimating in real cost, not in money, not in euros, not in dollars, not in time, but relatively. So you can use planning poker for it, you can use any kind of relative estimation technique for it. Cost estimations are typically done by the developers. So that's the second stakeholder that you ask to make this estimation. You see that according to our developers, the relative cost for updating the content is very high, especially if you compare it to the registration module or the customer migration. In the 7th step, we are going to calculate the cost percentage, which is again similar to the value, the relative cost divided by the total cost. And you see again that updating the content has the highest relative cost percentage. The final parameter, next to benefit, penalty, and cost, is risk. And there comes the tester. The tester can estimate the relative risk of each of these features. What is the risk that it will not work properly based on your gut feeling, based on your experience, based on your knowledge as a tester? And here our tester made an estimation that a customer migration is very risky. We haven't done it before, and if it goes wrong, well, we might expose our customer base for security reasons, or we might lose customers, or their profiles might be mixed up. While on the other hand, making a registration module, well, we've done that numerous times. I mean, you can pick that code standard out of the web, no problem there. So that's the risk. Risk percentage, again, rehearsal is your total risk your relative risk that you divide by your total risk. Now, if you bring the total model together, that's the final step of the Wiegers model. There you bring your value, your cost, and your risk together. Your total priority is determined by your value percentage, so the business relationship, divided by the sum of the cost percentage, your development parameter, and your testing parameter. And then you see that your priority number, the highest priority now all of a sudden is 0.80, which is your Facebook integration. One of the features I haven't named before. It didn't have the highest value, it didn't have the highest cost, and it didn't have the highest risk. But overall, this was the one that if you balance all these three, comes out as the highest priority. That keeps business happy, that keeps developers happy and testers happy. While customer migration, due to a high risk, 35%, has now the lowest priority. So that Uyghurs model might help you. Is this a silver bullet? No, it isn't. First, you need to come to an elicitation of all your requirements, and you need to bring your business, your developers, and your testers together and listen to each other. What you can do is start with a small exercise. You can even balance or weight these parameters. You can say a value is 2 times more important than cost, so you can play with that formula for yourself. You can use it only for a testing purpose. You can also use it as a development purpose. It's a nice addition also to any kind of planning poker or other prioritization that you might have. It's a way to better align with also the concept of the three amigos. So here's a Uyghurs model. If you take a look at Google or you drop me a mail, you find a lot of Excel sheets where you can play with it, or even online forms where you can play with it, and also play with the weighting. So up to you to try it. Final word for me to summarize this presentation. If you think about quality, quality can be determined and should be determined by a better prioritization, either by using the Kano model, by discussing, by a better awareness, or by using Uyghurs. If you come to a better prioritization, you will automatically achieve a higher level of quality because you focus on the right things. And if you achieve a higher level of quality, depending on the context where you're working and your own perceptions, then you will always have happier customers. And in the end, that is what we're trying to do, making sure people are happy with the software they're creating. I'd like to thank you for your attention for this webinar. You find my contact details at the bottom. If you have any questions, please drop me a line.